Welcome to Calvary Conversations. I'm Shaun LePage, the chairman of Ministry Studies Department at Calvary University, and your host for this conversation. And thanks for joining us. My guest today is Mr. Nate Morsches, and I have personally known Nate for a decade or so, and his bride. They are his wife Megan, and he and Megan have been married for 14 years now, and they have 4 kids. And Nate has for a long time served as a nurse in the Kansas City area, and he is currently the owner and president of RPG in Lawrence. Check that out when you get a chance in Lawrence, Kansas. And he's also a graduate of the Antioch School of Church Planting and Leadership Development, a ministry of Build International in Ames, Iowa. And he's also an elder and on the leadership team at my church. We go to the same church. And we've been serving together, working together for a long time. And we have been most recently discussing some things amongst our leadership team that I just feel like is going to be really helpful to anyone who listens to this conversation. So Nate, thanks for being with us today.
I appreciate the introduction, Shaun. You know, it's actually been almost 2 decades we've known each other.
That can't be possible. I'm too young. That just isn't possible. So yeah, I guess it was around 2007 or 2008, right?
Yeah, that's right. 2007.
So not quite 2 decades.
Right. Not quite.
Longer than a decade, that's for sure. But anyway, we go way back.
That's right.
But that's not exactly why I have you on the show today, actually, because Nate has been leading a discussion amongst our leadership team over the past several weeks. And I just think it is so good and so helpful to anybody who is just wanting to reach people for Christ. And we all know we live in a culture that is postmodern and in many ways unreceptive to the gospel. And so this conversation has really led our leadership team to really, I think, address some really important issues. So the gist of the conversation is that we started at one point just really talking about how we need to get very serious about reaching progressives. That was the term that kept coming up, and I don't use that in any way as a derogatory term. We understand progressives, and maybe Nate, you could help me clarify my definition here. But we see progressives as neighbors who are more liberal politically, socially, religiously, and we have progressives all around us in Lawrence, Kansas, and so we want to do a good job of gently and respectfully sharing our faith with them. And so Nate has introduced us and been leading this conversation about something called complex evangelism. So Nate, 2 things. How is my definition of progressives, and then help us understand, give us an introduction definition to complex evangelism.
Sure. Yeah. I think your definition is great. I want to reinforce that it's definitely not a derogatory term. To people who are very far on the right, they may use it derogatorily, excuse me, but people who are progressives use it as a badge of honor to be progressive. So, it's the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But regardless of derogatory or not, the The reason we're talking about progressives at all is primarily because our church is in Lawrence, and Lawrence, as probably many of you know, has a reputation for being the blue dot in the Red Sea. The Red Sea being the state of Kansas, and the blue dot being Lawrence, and Democrat Republican is what that refers to. It's a very progressive city, and so when it comes to trying to share the gospel, to fulfill the Great Commission, it doesn't matter if you're living in a progressive city or not. We still have the same goal, which is to reach the city. And so to do that, you need to understand the city. You need to understand the people. Shaun and I have been talking about exegeting the culture, right? We exegete the scriptures. We have to exegete the culture as well. And so, we focus on progressives because that's who we live with. But in Kansas City, it might not be so sharply part of the definition of your people. So in Lawrence, when we're talking about this complex evangelism, it includes progressives, but it's much bigger than that. Complex evangelism, evangelism is sharing the gospel, sharing the good news. But the reason it's complex is because we have to translate this to people who, in many ways, are not like us. If you at all are ever sharing the gospel, you have to translate it to people. You have to translate it culturally. You literally have to translate it linguistically. I mean, if you're speaking a language, you're already applying the gospel to a way that only certain people can understand. So with complex evangelism, you got all types of things to consider. Politics, the social climate, religion. You've got everything to deal with. And I suppose in terms of making a definition for complex evangelism for you, Shaun, it's understanding the culture around you and learning how best to share the gospel. And there are a lot of aspects to it. So I suppose that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and for me, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but for me, it's really thinking like missionaries. We are very familiar with missionaries who've gone to other countries, other cultures, and they exegete the culture. They try their best to understand the language, of course, as well as the customs and just the cultural environment in which they are trying to share Christ. And I think historically that hasn't been as necessary here. Arguably, maybe it has been, but we just kind of more naturally understand our own culture, and I think that's probably been the case historically. But I think we've moved into an era where I hear a lot of people saying, only a crazy person would believe that, or only an idiot would think that way, or whatever. And really, that's not fair. What we're talking about is a different worldview, right? We're talking about different cultures. America is truly multicultural. And so when it comes to progressives, there's I don't know what percentage of the American population would be considered progressive, but I think it's a very high percentage. And so for me, it's helpful to just think in those terms of being missionaries and exegeting the culture in which we're trying to share Christ. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so speak a little bit to that, I guess. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I do imagine some people saying, and actually I know some people who would say, why does it have to be so complex? Why can't we just share the gospel? Why does evangelism have to be complex, Nate?
Yes. So, Shaun, you made mention of the fact that we're in a postmodern culture, and we we live in a time when people are not quite as receptive to the gospel. I'd say we're we've already reached a place where you can call our society post-Christian, postmodern and post-Christian. And so when you're coming to people with completely different paradigms, completely different worldviews, um, you've got to speak the same language, and most of the time you're simply not. You can share pieces of the gospel with people, and they're not going to understand what you're even talking about. And what this hasn't been true for all of the 20th century. Even in the 50s, certainly there was sin in America, but if you were to talk about Jesus, people knew what that meant. People knew some basic foundational stuff. But now it's very different. People think they have an idea of Jesus. People think that they have an idea of Christianity, but you're not speaking the same language if you use those words. And really, when you're talking about the teachings of Jesus and the lifestyle, you're not even speaking the same language, because every sector of society that we're involved with has its own worldview. So, for example, in nursing, there are specific ways of thinking that are common throughout. Ways to take care ways to take care of patients, philosophies behind why and how you take care of patients, those types of things. And to be honest, there are some things in the worldview that are not quite biblical. And so as we try to share the gospel within those sectors of society, we first have to demonstrate um, commonalities. We need to demonstrate some common ground, and we need to demonstrate how the gospel beats the various aspects of their worldviews that are not biblical. And only then, really, when people have understood us and we've understood them, can we begin to really tell people the gospel, because again, you've got to speak the same language.
Right. Okay, so get us started here. What are some of the main components of the approach of complex evangelism?
Yeah, I'll give you a real life example. So when I first started nursing, this was in the emergency department at my local hospital. And there was sort of a culture in the department itself of nurses being lazy. They would have the techs go do work for them, and it was just sort of this drudgery, drudgery in the atmosphere all the time. Well, when I first started, I talked to one of the charge nurses and I said, "So how long would it take for me to become a charge nurse?" And she said, "Well, you're a new nurse. I'd say maybe 5 years. An experienced nurse, it could potentially take 2. But really that'd be pushing it for you." I said, "Kelly, I'm going to be a charge nurse in 2 years. And mark my words." So I spent the rest of the time in the department, working my butt off. And, I regularly was sharing the gospel with patients and my employees, but they actually asked me to stop because some people had complained. I understand. But I spent the rest of the next 2 years just working my butt off and really like working hard to raise the spirits of the people around me. And, soon enough, we were like this machine, high productivity, taking good care of the patients and everything. And then at the end of 2 years, I did become a charge nurse. And it was at that point, in a leadership position, after I'd worked hard to change the culture, that then people were asking me questions about my faith. And I was obviously glad to share. And I had a lot more opportunities because people had seen how the worldview I had not only changed me, but also changed our department in a lot of positive ways. So this complex evangelism, you really want to impact the worldviews that are currently held. You need to engage them and show them that the gospel is better. And then, you've got a lot of opportunity to share after that. You've got influence.
Great picture. It reminds me of that verse in Titus 2, and I don't remember which verse it is, but Paul talks about adorning the gospel well,
Mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm,
adorning the doctrine of God, I think.
mm-hmm,
So that's what you're talking about here, is adorning the gospel well, right?
mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so how do we do that? What are some of the tools of a more complex evangelism that helps us to understand the culture well? So your example kind of highlights just the importance of doing your work well in the
Yeah.
community, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it definitely takes initiative, and you've got to be willing to put yourself out there. You've got to do some things that may or may not be very comfortable. You if you don't have influence, you have to gain influence. You have to do good in the community, and this is an important point. There are lots of things that we know are good that the culture finds irrelevant. But there are certain things that they define as good that the church may think is irrelevant. In those scenarios, it's important to really, in order to communicate to others that you care about them and you want to do good to them, do the things that they understand as good. Right? Like it's like the five love languages, that book. The goal is to know what your spouse's love language is so that you can communicate to them how they understand love. That's the same thing we're trying to do here with the culture. We need to understand what they view as good and to do those things. Obviously, the culture does think some things are good that we know by scripture are evil, and we're just not going to do those things. But any time there's the ability to compromise without compromising the biblical instructions to us, then let's do that. Let's do that. It's a big deal here in Lawrence. For the in terms of restoration of prisoners, people have a high value on taking care of people who've come out of jail, come out of prison, and are now re-entering society. So we spent a good amount of time doing a mentorship program for those people who were coming out of the prisons. Now, we had a million options that we could choose from to do good works, but we knew this one was valuable to the people, so we did it. That's what we focused on because it's important to them. And what
Good.
was the original question there?
That's okay. I'm looking for the kind of the specific components. And why don't you just kind of walk us through maybe some of the things you've been doing in our discussions as a leadership team. Say, for example, one night we had a discussion about common grace,
Mhm.
and then these 7 features of a church for the city. Why don't you walk us through some of those? Because I think those are really like tangible tools that churches can use, leadership teams can use, and just sit down and walk through those exercises. So why don't you introduce us to some of those?
Yeah. So common grace is obviously not something I've developed on my own. This doctrine has existed for a very long time. It's been developed by other people. But the idea is that God causes the sun and the rain to come down on the righteous and the wicked. Um, you know, Everybody gets food and water. Everybody has shelter. I mean, of course, there are homeless people. There are people who struggle with hunger. Yes, but the fact is, God blesses everyone in a lot of ways. And in fact, God blesses some people who are non-believers, seemingly to us more. There are a lot of very rich people who are not Christians. There are a lot of people who have mansions, and God has given them those things. And with common grace, it's an understanding that not only does God bless all people in various ways, but he also blesses non-believers with particular skills. And as we work together to take care of our city so that everybody benefits, believers and non-believers can work together, and not feel like there's some tension there. We want to do good to the city. We want to honor God in our actions, and it's okay to recognize that God has blessed non-believers with a conscience. We don't have to explain away when a non-believer does something good. We don't have to say, well, yeah, that's fine, but still going to hell, or we don't have to do stuff like that. We can acknowledge there is good in them because God has blessed them to an extent. We need to acknowledge that, in fact, if we really want to have the respect we need, because they are image bearers of God just like us. So that's common grace, and it goes into how we exegete our culture, because there's a baseline level of respect. There's an understanding that we can work side by side, to do good to others, and as we're working to complexly evangelize our city, we're going to be working side by side in the different sectors of society with them as well. You were talking, Shaun, about the 7 features of a church for the city. This is an idea brought up by Tim Keller. It's a wonderful book called Center Church. I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a really great paradigm changer for how to approach your city. And he is actually the one who came up with these 7 features of a church for the city. So I'll go ahead and just tell you what they are here. I've got the book right here. And so these 7 features are what churches who are in urban centers really need to be able to do in order to reach their cities. So respect for urban sensibility is the first. Unusual sensitivity to cultural differences. Commitment to neighborhood and justice. Integration of faith and work. Bias for complex evangelism. Preaching that both attracts and challenges urban people. And commitment to artistry and creativity. So you'll actually notice he used the term complex evangelism there. This term I got from Tim Keller, but we actually sort of use it in a different way, which I can go through in a little bit. But these 7 features of a church for the city, it's what we don't want to do is take the suburban model of church and try and transplant it in places where that type of thing just isn't going to work. It takes a level of hipness. You've got to avoid like extra polished presentation. People in the city don't like when they're trying to be sold something or that you're putting on a performance. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be you've got to have urban sensibilities is the point. And all these different things, arts and culture, what he said in there about neighborhood and justice, like these are the things that are important in the city, which is why we need to focus on them. And it's important to remember that these 7 features don't replace the mission we've been given, the Great Commission. They just sort of help us understand how to do it in a city. So Tim Keller's got a lot of great insight in this book. And what else can I tell you about it, Shaun?
Well, I think it's good to mention Tim Keller because he's kind of a high-profile person who he has a pretty good track record for reaching people in the urban setting. Reaching progressives.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we wouldn't say that he's the only person that's having this conversation. There are actually many people who are kind of rethinking how we do church in the 21st century and in the culture in which we find ourselves in 2021. I think it's good that you gave him credit, but of course he's not the only one who's impacted you or us in this conversation. We're running out of time, actually, but try to give us just a quick suggestion for how churches can develop a strategy for doing complex evangelism. I mean, Obviously, it's, when you attach the word complex there, we're recommending that there be some leadership team, elder board, strategizing, and not just let's have another evangelism training class. That's obviously necessary. It's necessary for people to know how to share the gospel, but we also need to really think like missionaries and strategize in our setting, in our community, in our culture. So give us a couple of ideas for how a leadership team in a local church can start to develop a strategy for doing complex evangelism.
Absolutely. So the first thing that's just going to be so important is you've got to be involved in the city. You've got to take on responsibilities in the city and get involved with different organizations that maybe you may feel like, geez, this cause, I care about it, but I'm not passionate about it. Well, that's not even necessarily the point. The city is passionate about this cause. So join alongside and work hard. With your neighbors, with the other people who are in the organization, participate, join groups, make sure that you're a part of different social networks, because whatever sector of society that you are, volunteering in or participating in, you've got opportunity to be able to engage worldviews. But if you're not out in the community, you will not be able to do this. We can study about our culture, we can exegete our culture, but if you're not out there getting to know people, if you're not out there working hard for others, you really can't take the first step in terms of complex evangelism. Now, consider your job. Every member of your church, as you're working to strategize, has to make a living, and they're involved in the culture just by the fact that they have a job and they see these people on a regular basis. So we've got to equip our people, and I say this is also step 2. Equip the people to understand how to engage worldviews at their job. And again, that does not necessarily mean that they are running around to other employees trying to tell them, you're doing this wrong, or even beating people over the head with the gospel. Because remember, you need to speak the same language with people before you can really truly share the gospel. So the members of your church need to be equipped to engage worldviews, changing things, showing that the gospel is more powerful than the worldviews that exist. Another important aspect would be to do the work that we're doing now, which is, I literally have a running document that we've been filling out as a church. These are the things about our culture in Lawrence. These are this is how our people act. These are the different neighborhoods. These are the different characteristics of every neighborhood, and plot it all out, collectively, paint a picture of your city, so that we're all on the same page about who we're trying to reach. Kansas City is going to be, way more diverse ethnically than Lawrence is. That'll be a big part of churches in Kansas City's, running list here. But put together a profile of your city, the demographics. I'd say those steps are going to be hugely important. And then actual execution, what we're trying to do is gain influence so that we can share the gospel, gain influence so that we can continue to do good, so we can continue to expand our influence. At all times we're working to expand. So those are some important aspects, I'd say, of complex evangelism and putting together a strategy.
That's great. I think of a lot of people I've had conversations with recently, Christians who basically just say something to the effect of, I just don't understand, how people can think this way or whatever. And so, it's good that you're really saying, let's start by understanding the people around us,
Yes.
not even necessarily starting there, but starting with, really being involved in the community, and then our understanding will grow. So those two things are
Yes.
kind of simultaneous.
Yeah.
But we really do need to understand, and I really enjoyed the process of just, listening to everybody in our church, just talking about, these are the characteristics of our community. These are the things that are important to the people around us, and all that kind of thing. That's a really good exercise. And I think the other thing that comes to my mind, Nate, is that what I'm really excited about this approach, because it does, and hopefully, churches will uh, really catch the vision for how, the lay person, as they're often called, play such a crucial role in this, because somebody who's been working in the community for many years is going to have a lot of insight to how the people of at least his or her, the connections that they have, how the people think, and what's important to them. And so we're really, this kind of an approach is really going to highlight that, and I think break down that sacred secular a wall that has really been just a plague on the church over the years. This needs to be, this is really all about bringing the so-called layman, the lay person, into the conversation, and they're going to have so much wealth of knowledge, I believe, to contribute to the conversation, in just helping the church understand the people of the community. And let's get more involved in the community. And I like how you said that, even if it's not something that we're passionate about, it might really be just a great way to connect with the people of our community, and just show them that we care about them, we care about what they care about.
Yes.
And we want to be a part of your lives. I think, I remember years ago, a book came out by, I think it was Joe Aldrich, and he said it was called Friendship Evangelism. And the criticism was that, you might spend so much time trying to be friends that you never get around to sharing the gospel. And that's certainly not a position that, that we would want to promote.
Right.
We do want to get around to sharing the gospel. We do want to live out the gospel in a way that the people in our community can see and relate with, and that's just what this is really all about. And so I just so appreciate you visiting with me, Nate. I appreciate what you're doing for our church and leading us in these conversations. And it's not simple.
No.
That's a complex. Evangelism is a great term, because it's not simple. It never has been simple.
Right.
And so we just need to acknowledge that, and just ask God to bless our efforts, and show us how we can best reach the people of our culture and our time. But anyway,
right.
so thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for those of you who have been listening to this conversation. God bless you. Grace and peace.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.